Tonight, find out who Ross Perot really is as he frankly discusses business success, leadership, and his life. In the second part of our conversation with Ross Perot. Here now is Murphy Martin.
Good evening, and welcome to a conversation with Ross Perot. Ross, I'd like for you to pick up your story after your career in the Navy and also at IBM, when you started your first business, EDS, a company which brought a new idea to the computer world. Who gave you your first big break?
February 1963. We finally got Frito-Lay interested. At that point, IBM was determined that we wouldn't make the sale. They got Republic National Bank, the biggest bank in Texas, Arthur Young, the biggest accounting firm in Texas, and the three of them went out to Herman Lay, the founder of Frito-Lay, and told him that if he did business with this little outfit, we would put him under. Mr. Lay started Frito-Lay cooking potato chips in his kitchen and delivering them in his truck. And one of the most beautiful stories in my memory is after all these big companies left, Mr. Lay looked around the room. He says, you know, this is interesting. These boys from EDS must have something. Otherwise, all these big outfits wouldn't be overreacting this way. And he gave us our break. And the rest was history. We sold one company after another, and when I sold EDS and left in 1986, I sold it to General Motors, the worldwide organization with about 45,000 employees. It was a wonderful 24-year experience. Now, let's go back to why EDS was so successful. See, one common thing you see about people who build very successful businesses is they don't have all the skills. They are normally of average intelligence, and they reach out and surround themselves with very talented people. All the credit for the success of EDS goes to those people. They did unbelievable things. I could tell you stories by the hour. We'd do in 3 months what all the rest of the industry took 18 months to do. These small, high-talent teams would, you know, they could climb a cliff covered with ice in 3 minutes that everybody else would say, wait till spring. We really had a lot of fun, but it's very important to me always to point out that I started it, but an incredible team of people built it, and most of the time I was just sitting there with them having fun. They did it.
You have said since the first day the success of EDS is its people. What was your philosophy about people at EDS? Well,
a lot of colorful stories in the company about that, about meetings and things we had on that subject. But the general theme is, I don't care who you are, I don't care where you come from, I don't care where you went to school, I don't care if you went to school. I don't care what color you are, I don't care what race you are, I don't care what sex you are. And finally one day we had a recruiter, his former Marine, he says, Perot, do you care about anything? And I says, yeah, I care about what you can do and what you've done lately. That's all I care about. And that became the theme. What you can do and what you've done lately. And then we got into, I said, well, now, what kinds of folks are we looking for? Now, in big corporate America, 5'10", blonde, blue eyes, MBA, 3.6 grade point, got him, right? At EDS, smart, tough, self-reliant, people who had been a success since childhood. People who loved to win. And then finally, we had a guy raise his hand one day. He said, well, what if we run out of people who love to win, Ross? And I said, just find people who hate to lose. Now, see, that spirit gave us an incredible edge over everybody else. Now, we were like the Three Musketeers, one for all and all for one, and we stuck together. We lived those philosophies. See, everybody, the newest entry-level employee had the same health benefits I had. That sends a message. I could afford a doctor. A health problem in his family would be a crisis. Anytime, night or day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, anybody on the EDS team or his family had a health crisis, it was a 5-alarm alert to see that the same doctors and the same medical attention was given to that family member or that person that would be given to a member of my family. Now see, that spirit gives you a winning edge. Nobody ever had to worry about himself. Nobody ever had to look over his shoulder. There was never any question if something happened to you, who would take care of your family. We were a family.
And the public got a look at your commitment to that family back in 1979 when you assembled a team to rescue 2 EDS employees from Iran. But before we discuss that, I'd like to talk about one of your other lifelong commitments to the POWs and MIAs of the Vietnam War. How did you get involved in that?
I first got involved because one of the wives approached me. Her husband was missing. She didn't know whether he was dead or alive. She brought her little boy in, and we started pressing the Vietnamese about whether or not he was alive. They admitted he was alive, they allowed him to write, and they had to account for him. And then as we got deeper and deeper into this, we realized what a tragedy it was, because the men were dying, literally dying in prison from brutality and neglect. We came up with the idea of the Christmas trip. We took that to Washington, got it cleared. Then we came up with the idea of families whose husbands were missing, including their children, going to Paris that same Christmas. We chartered and got approval for that. We chartered a plane to Paris, chartered a plane to Laos, filled the plane to Laos with specific things the POWs needed. We got that from POWs who had been released. Now, this is something we didn't know until later. While we were on the ground in Laos, they changed the treatment. They took a man out of a box that had been there for 5 years, who had lost his ability to speak, people who had been tortured brutally, people who had not had adequate food or medicine, very large men who were down to 100 pounds. They started giving them proper nutrition because they realized that in a war where everything else favored them, they were being brutalized across the world for the way they treated our prisoners. The impact of that Paris trip was awesome, too. These women and children on Christmas Day begging for information about their loved ones. We kept it up for 3 years. They came home in 1973, and it was a big day when they came home. And God bless them, they called us from the Philippines and said, the man had called, said, Ross, I had 2 calls. I called my wife, and I called you on behalf of the other prisoners because they asked me to call you. And I said, well, I appreciate that, but how did they know to call me? And he laughed. He said, Ross, everybody shot down brought the message in of what you were doing and why you were doing it. I never knew that. But the people flying missions after '69 carried the message in. We knew we were not forgotten. We knew why the treatment changed. We knew the American people cared for us. And I then said, well, if you had 2 calls, you were nice to call me, but you called the wrong person. You should have called Colonel Simons, whose men went to Santee, the prison outside of Hanoi. They risked their lives for you. And I loved his response. Without any hesitation, he said, you're right. I said, well, let's do this, Jerry. As soon as you get home, after you've seen your families, why don't all of you all come together to thank the men who went to Santee? He said, we'll do it. A couple of weeks later, they called and said, we're ready to do it. We want to do it in San Francisco. I said, guys, you've been away too long. San Francisco is a rough town as far as Vietnam is concerned. We'll have a lot of demonstrations. They said, it's the best party town in the country. That's where we want it. So that's where we'll have it. To make a long story short, sent a couple of young tigers out to San Francisco. The city fathers embraced them. They planned the biggest parade in the history of San Francisco. It went off without a hitch. There was only one demonstrator on the whole parade, and that was not a problem. And it's a weekend I will never forget because the sergeants, the special tough guys came from all over the world. Their wives met them there. Colonel Simons was there. And the men who had endured hell for all of us for up to 8 years came together not to be recognized, but to thank the men who went to save them. And that is certainly one of the most memorable weekends. I was just sort of standing in the shadows watching it, but it was beautiful. Now, Mrs. Reagan was there, and the most memorable thing that I recall about the celebrities is I introduced Colonel Arthur Simons to John Wayne. Big tears came in John Wayne's eyes, and he said, Colonel, you are in real life the role I only play in the movies. Now see, we get all confused. John Wayne never did any of those things. I really admired him for saying just openly, I've never done any of these things. These are just parts I play. You've done it. Say, you've done it.
Did we leave people behind in Vietnam after that war?
See, when I was in Laos, I talked to the Pathet Lao. That's the communist Lao. I talked to the people in our embassy who briefed me about the prisoners held by the Pathet Lao. I talked to the Pathet Lao leader in Vientiane and asked him if there would be any way possible to get a list because it would mean so much to the families. This is 1970. He said, I see no reason why not. come back tomorrow. I came back the next day, he says, I cannot do it. Then I talked to him, and he boasted about holding large numbers of Americans. The day before, I had been told by the CIA chief and the ambassador, the CIA chief in the embassy, that they did hold large numbers of Americans, and that we knew that because we had broken the radio codes and we knew who they held and where they were. But that we could not rescue them because we would probably get them killed trying to rescue them. Now, fast forward to 1973, when the Paris peace negotiations. Dr. Kissinger and those in the peace negotiations are moving heaven and earth to get the prisoners back. There was no stomach, though, to give them any leverage in this country. At that time, the same communist Lao leader that I talked with stepped forward and said, we hold large numbers of prisoners, but we will not give our prisoners up until you, the United States of America, pay us our part of the reparations money that President Nixon had promised. 350 people, Murphy. 350 people in Laos. 350 great American patriots, Air Force, Navy, Army people, and some CIA people, and some Air America people, Continental Air Services people. There was zero will on the part of the American people to crank up that war again for any reason. And this breaks my heart to say it, but we left them in Laos, and we left 350. And the evidence is overwhelming. Now then, over the years, the intelligence evidence that men stayed alive, and the satellite evidence, and the evidence of intercepted radio traffic of people taken from Laos to Russia for interrogation, and on and on and on and on and on, is overwhelming. There's only one question: is there anyone still alive today? One of my problems with the people in Washington now is they say, certainly, they now admit after 20-some-odd years, we left them, but there's no one left alive. That is a sad way to approach it. The way it should be approached to Laos specifically is, look, prove. What did you do with them? We know you had them. You boasted about having them. If you kill them all, show us the mass graves like the Russians did on the Polish officers. Account for them. There's no pressure to do that. Keep in mind, we never admitted we were at war in Laos. We pretended we weren't. It was a war run by the CIA but fought by uniformed military people. And this is a tragedy. Now, let me say this. If there's one person alive, the principle is still the same as if there are 350. There is reasonably fresh evidence of people still being alive. Now, I really care about this. And if this is a country that can write off one person who goes into combat and puts his life on the line for us just because it's expeditious, I'm out of sync. And in the event that the American people send me to Washington as their servant, I don't think there's any question in anybody's mind who ever wore the uniform of the United States of America, this is going to be dealt with head-on as a high priority. And we're not going to duck it, even though we've ducked it for 20-some-odd years. You never send troops into combat and leave them. And the whole lesson, and I'll leave it on this note, the lesson learned from all these tragedies around Vietnam and Laos is first commit the nation and then commit the troops. Never send people into combat if we're not committed back here. That's the tragedy of that war.
Never send them into combat and leave them, nor do you send employees to foreign countries to work and abandon them there. Tell us about that Iran rescue. Ken Follett turned it into a bestseller, but we'd like to hear it in your words.
We were doing business in Iran. Suddenly, as the revolution was taking place, they became, and the Americans were leaving, they became frightened that we would leave and they could not run the computers. We had no plans to leave. We had made elaborate plans because of our obligation to keep the computers running with our Iranian employees and some of our key employees who were willing to stay, but they just took the first 2 American hostages were our 2 top people. December 28th, 1978, I got a call from Bill Gaten, who was in charge of our international operations. I couldn't believe it. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I called the man who ran the Sante raid, Colonel Arthur Bull Simons, a legendary figure who is now retired. He was living on a farm in Florida. His wife had died several months earlier. I woke him up at 2 o'clock in the morning. He and I had not spoken in 7 years. I explained my problem to him, and when I finished, and I asked him if he would come to Dallas to help develop a backup plan to rescue our people. And when I finished, I'll never forget his words. This is pure Simons. He said, "Yeah, I'll do it." And Colonel Simons came to Dallas. I had hired several thousand Vietnam veterans as a matter of principle. One of the great success stories inside EDS is the leadership skills these young 26, 27-year-old people brought back with them. They'd been back 10 years now. It's 1979. So I went through the ranks of all these. I probably had 5,000 or 6,000 by then, picked out the ones with the most battlefield experience, the most highly decorated, so on and so forth. Colonel Simons interviewed them. He picked his rescue team. Now, the most memorable event of my life was when we called the rescue team together for the first time. I had never asked people to risk their lives. These were people with tremendous combat records, but they had wives, children, mortgages, all the responsibilities of young families. 10 years off the battlefield. I hoped 1 out of 5 would say yes. Every single person volunteered. Now see, that's what's so great about our country. Every single person, without any hesitation, volunteered, because those were their friends, and you don't leave your friends behind. It's the same principle as the POWs. And now again, my mother is now dying of cancer. She was absolutely riveted on these two men because of her concern for them and their families. And that dominated the conversation every time I'd go to the hospital. It came to, I needed to go in. The country was in total chaos. There was a good chance she would never see me again. When I finished discussing it with her, without a trace of emotion, she said, "These are your men. You sent them over there. They didn't do anything wrong. The government won't do anything to get them out." Now, I've left that out. We tried every way in the world to get help from our government. Didn't get any. The government won't do anything to get them out. It's your responsibility to get them out. To make a long story short, I went over. By then, they'd moved them into a much more secure prison. It was a fortress. I was in Tehran for about a week. Nobody knew I was there until I went to the U.S. Embassy. Then some Iranian working in the embassy told everybody, and they were tearing the town up for me because I was a better hostage. But I blended in, stayed out of sight. Then, one of my purposes was to go into the prison and brief the two men about the rescue, about being ready, and we were going to come get them. I'll never forget Colonel Simons. He says, "No problem, you can go on into the prison." And I said, "Now, why is that, Colonel?" He says, "Well, one branch of the government is looking for you, and another branch of the government runs the prisons, and no chance they'll coordinate anything." And I said, "Well, are you going to go in with me?" He says, "No, there's no need for me to go." Pure Simons. Never take a risk you don't have to take. I went into the prison. Camera crews were standing there. I thought, oh my gosh, this is it. They ignored me. I got into the prison. I found out why. Ramsey Clark was there. Ramsey Clark recognized me. I shook hands with Ramsey Clark. The general then decided I must be all right. You see, luck. And I got to see our two people in privacy. And we got to have a really good conversation. And I made it very clear to them that we were going to get them out, but not to get up every morning thinking that was the day. Otherwise, they'd just burn up all their adrenaline. Be patient. We had a team in place. Their pals were back in the country. Well, to make a long story short, on the magic day, they did it. Excuse me, before that. Then I left the country because my job was to be in Turkey with the backup team in case they got in trouble, and we would try to come in and get the rescue team out. As I was leaving, Bill Gaydon, the head of International, was coming in. And I had not asked him to come in. And I said, "Bill, why are you here?" He says, "Because my men are here." And I said, "Well, when will I see you again?" He says, "When you see them." Now that's leadership, Murphy. What kind of country would we be if we had that kind of leadership? Here's a man, very wealthy man, didn't even have to work, but he had to be there, and he left his wife and his 2 daughters to be there because his men were over there unfairly imprisoned. Now guess who the last man to come out of Turkey was? Bill Gaydon. Everybody else came out, then Gaydon walked out. That's leadership. Okay. I'm leaving the airport. They're tearing the city up looking for me. They've got my name and my picture at the airport. I have to fill out all these forms. This goes back to my luck. The girl that was to check me was reading a paperback novel. She pulled my yellow sheet out that had my name on it. She stamped my passport. She never looked at any of it. This was 5 minutes before the plane was to leave. I thought, well, this is it. I've made it. 8 hours later, I was sitting 50 feet from her because the plane was delayed. And I had pumped all the adrenaline in the first 20 minutes, so I was just sitting there relaxed. She never checked the documents, and I got out. For the first time in my life, I really worried about my luck running out, and I'll never forget when the plane cleared the runway. In my head, this literally happened. I had an hourglass with the sand running out, and I turned it around. And I thought, well, we get a fresh start on your luck. Well, we came back. Everything was set. Brought the rescue team into Turkey. It came all the way into eastern Turkey to be spring-loaded. Those guys were ready to take the worst risk of all, led by some great people. But to make a long story short, pure Colonel Simons, the rescue went without a hitch. There was not a single casualty from the prison. Now, we got back to Dallas. All the families were there. It was one of the high points of my life to see Paul and Bill reunited with their wives and children. And my mother, who was dying of cancer, had given, she had just said, I am going to the airport to see these people reunited with their children. That was in February. She died in May. But, see, as far as she was concerned, this is something you had to do. We had to do it, and we did it. Now, my last words as we left the airport that day is, I looked at all the rescue team and I said, guys, we're not going to do this again. We're going to get out of the country early if we're ever around a revolution. Once is enough for a lifetime.
Ross, something else you feel like that you have to do is support causes that you believe in here at home, including education. How did you get involved in these issues?
Well, first, they're my parents, the examples they set as a child. I'd been taught always to share with other people. Secondly, Margot is a huge influence on me, and she is a very kind and generous person. So within 30 days after we first had more money than we needed to pay the bills, we gave away half of it to people in need. We gave it to a program for disadvantaged children. It was a special school. It was the Dunbar School. It's in the poorest part of Dallas, primarily black and Hispanic children. The logo of the school was a thumbprint. It was what we now call early childhood education. This is 1968. This was pretty soon after the Civil Rights Act was passed. These little children were way behind going into the first grade. So we started this early childhood development program, and it was fascinating. I learned so much from it. Number one, we were worried to death whether or not we could make school the best part of their lives. The logo was the thumbprint, and that was told to every child, there's only one person in the world like you. You are unique, you are precious, you are special. And in this school, and because you live in America, you are going to be anything you want to be. Then I sat around worrying, could we make school the best part of their lives? Murphy, it was the only good part of their lives. No contest.
Much has been said in the press about your wealth. Do you have a philosophy on money?
Murphy, I have lived completely across the economic spectrum. Money is the most overrated thing in the world. As I said earlier, Margot and I are no happier today than we were the day we came into Dallas with everything we owned in our car. See, we had one another then. We have one another and 5 great children, 6 wonderful grandchildren, 3 great sons-in-law, 1 great daughter-in-law. Nobody could be happier than we are because of those things. The money doesn't bring the happiness. Margot and I never bought anything we couldn't pay cash for. And I'll say this, back in those days, looking forward to it was really more fun than having it. Once you had it, you kind of started thinking about something else. But the anticipation of working, saving your money, looking forward to doing it, getting it. So you need enough money to take care of your family. But beyond that, the only worthwhile use of having money beyond that point is to do constructive things for others.
Tell us about your family.
Those are my greatest riches. And no man could be more blessed. Margot is everybody's friend. Certainly, I adore her. Everybody knows that. She is a world-class mother. I could best summarize that by the fact when the children, our children, gave a women's and children's hospital in their mother's honor. And I don't cry easy, but tears came in my eyes when they made this statement at the presentation. It is our hope that every child born in this hospital will have a mother just like ours. And if every child did, what a world we would have. Now, Margot is a saint. And then, if you look at our children, all 5 are just too good to be true. Years ago, a person asked me, how did it feel to be successful? My children were small, and I said, I won't know until my children are grown. But if they turn out to be good citizens with a deep concern for other people and a willingness to do something about that concern, then I'll feel like a big success. They're all grown, they're great, and I now feel successful because of what they are.
Ross, as you look back on a life that's very enriching, what are your happiest memories to this point?
The happiest memories, my childhood with my parents, meeting Margot, marrying Margot, the births of my 5 children, nothing tops that. Most memorable event was when all of the men in EDS volunteered to go on the rescue. 100% of the people I asked. That was nothing happy about that. Getting back was happy. That was one of the happy memories. The births of my grandchildren are enormously happy memories. Going to the rallies, and as the states turned in their petitions, is one memory I will carry with me for the rest of my life of all of these wonderful people who were acting as owners of the country again, who realized that although they didn't have the money to buy influence, they had something more important. They had the vote. At the Churchill dinner, when I received the Churchill Award, I was asked if I considered myself a lion like Churchill, and I said no. And then they said, well, do you ever think of yourself in any role? And I'd never had. And I thought for a minute, I said, well, maybe. I said, at one time, I kind of wished that I could be a beautiful pearl. But then I looked in the mirror and I realized that wasn't in the cards. And then I said, maybe I can be the oyster that makes the pearl. But that didn't work out either. And years ago, I decided that maybe my lot in life was to be the grain of sand that irritated the oyster that made the pearl.
Ross, sorry that's all the time that we have for today. We do thank you, and we thank you for watching. We'll have a chance to meet Ross Perot's family in the days ahead. We hope you'll keep watching, and mark your calendars. Election Day is November 3rd. Good night, everybody.
If you would like to learn more about Ross Perot's ideas on how to create jobs in America, deal with the deficit, and clean up the mess in Washington, please read United We Stand, How We Can Take Back Our Country. We will be presenting future programs on the issues which face America and concrete solutions on how to deal with them. Please check your local listings and tune in.